Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, organizers, for allowing me to present our exciting data looking at sleep, not platelets, but sleep on specifically on the pediatric cohort from RECOVER. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the methodology of RECOVER, but mostly talking about our involvement with this trial. As you all know, this is a multi-site study, large data set. And we had access to looking at Tier 1 symptom survey for about almost just under 10,000 patients. And for this abstract, I'm presenting data that pertains to infants age 0 to 2 and preschool aged participants age 3 to 5, where we have about 515 and 644 participants, including patients with history of COVID infection and also uninfected controls. So why is sleep relevant? Many of us in pediatrics know that sleep is a very important phenomenon for normal child development, everything ranging from normal cognitive and emotional development, physical health, and then later we start to understand how it has its impact on mental health. We also know that systemically that there are a lot of challenges in sleep in children, particularly in youth, where a lot of school age and especially adolescents are not getting enough sleep. And so there is really this epidemic of insufficient sleep amongst children in the United States. There's also demographic characteristics that vary as kids get older. We start to see what we call a delayed sleep phase phenotype that also makes it challenging for these kids to sort of align their circadian clock towards how to function with school and society. And then finally, we also know that sleep disorders are emerging as a big player of pediatric disease. So things like sleep apnea can affect 5%, even up to 10% of all children in certain communities in the United States. And even more common is insomnia, or the difficulty falling or staying asleep, can affect as nearly as 40% of children. So a lot of these children have these conditions. And in fact, what's disheartening is there's not a lot of sleep specialists to be able to help manage these patients. Now, how does sleep pertain to long COVID? So we know immensely from adult data that there is this manifestation of sleep and fatigue disturbances in adults, everything ranging from trouble sleeping or insomnia to even having nightmares, alterations in sleep duration, and collectively these might actually result in this phenotype of either fatigue and or daytime sleepiness. So in our study, we wanted to see, are there similar observations seen in children? We know that there are certain elements about pediatric long COVID that might be divergent in pediatric populations, but I was curious to see whether there are commonalities seen in the pediatric population. Now, before we get into the data, I also wonder that if we can see a unification of sleep disturbance in children as we do in adults, does that kind of help explain some of the mechanisms related to how long COVID affects sleep? And in this slide, we fully don't understand the actual mechanism, but there are thoughts that there might be persistent infection or persistent drivers of inflammation, including neuroinflammation. Could this result in disruptions into normal blood-brain integrity? And then finally, is this mitochondrial dysfunction that's resulting in some of these pathways? But the bottom line is what we think causes sleep disturbance is really at the area of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the area of the brain that really regulates sleep and wakefulness. And so certain conditions that are well described that are affected by that is things like narcolepsy, things like Prader-Willi syndrome. We wonder if this is the same site that's involved in seeing disruption in sleep. So in this study, we wanted to see, does this start early? And so we looked at the two youngest populations, infants and preschoolers. And the goal was to characterize a prevalence and clinical phenotype of sleep disturbances in these groups. In those participants categorized as having long COVID compared to uninfected peers. Now, this data was published by Rachel and colleagues in JAMA Pediatrics, and you'll see here that in that seminal article, there was a cluster of symptoms that fell into each of these age groups. And you can see in both of these age groups, sleeping or troubles with sleeping was a pretty predominant feature, such that if you look at what was defined as the Long COVID Research Index, for infants and toddlers, having trouble sleeping gave you a score of 3.5, and obviously if you have a score of greater than 4, you were classified as long COVID probable. Well, even more so, if you look at preschool children, there were really only 2 questions that classified patients as long COVID probable, and you needed a score of greater than 3.0. And if the preschool child or the parent of the preschool child endorsed daytime tiredness, sleepiness, or low energy, immediately you were classified as having long COVID probable. So what we wanted to look at is those 2 groups that were classified based on the long COVID status, and looked at these various outcomes: insomnia, which was trouble sleeping; hypersomnia, which in the symptom survey was classified based on feeling sleepy or feeling tired all day long; mixed type would be having elements of both insomnia and hypersomnia. We also had the advantage of looking at reported sleep duration and other sleep symptoms, including nightmares and night terrors, which are events during night where young children can have a significant screaming during sleep. In terms of sleep duration, this was not a sleep diary. This was asking parents how much children slept during the weekdays and the weekends, and we came up with a composite sleep duration. And then we reclassified sleep duration based on recommended guidelines as what is healthy, short, or long sleep. Now, to do this study, we did not want operational bias, where we would automatically inflate our sample just based on having sleep disturbance, which is, as you can see in the preschool children, if you almost over half of the population would have this sleep problem. So what we did in this study was we eliminated the questions pertaining sleep from the long COVID research index. So what I'm presenting to you today is a modified index, not the index that was used that described in the JAMA Pediatrics paper. In our classifications, our control group or reference group were uninfected, but we had basically 3 groups. We had those patients that exceeded the score that were classified as past probable, those patients who did not meet threshold but had symptoms which were past unspecified, and then there were participants who reported no symptoms, which we are now currently classifying as past unlikely, although our group may reclassify this shortly. And so what I'm showing you here is just the demographic summary of this population using this modified index. And what you can see here is that the past unspecified, there are 0 patients in the preschool children. This might be a reflection of the fact that we eliminated the sleep symptoms score in that index. But we do get a sense of how much sleep is, or how many patients are still in the past probable group, allowing us to do this analysis. And when we take it a step further and we look at outcomes, we do see that there, particularly in the preschool children, with the reclassification index, we do have a lot of low counts, and so we use statistically a Firth correction to account for that. And what I'm highlighting here in the red bars gives you a sense of what we found to be most common. Almost 20% of past probable infants and 13% of past probable infants, preschool children, have insomnia, which is quite high for quite such a young age group. And if we look at the following adjustment, we see that what emerged in the preschool children was only nightmares, with an adjusted odds ratio of 3.3. The insomnia and night terrors did not attain statistical significance, but they trended high. And again, this is probably related to the fact that we observed low counts. We did look at sleep duration, and in this cohort, unlike what we found in the adolescent cohort, sleep duration was not affected. But one of the rich things about the RECOVER data set is we get to look at other elements that modify disease, in this case sleep. And so we observed it even in infant and preschool children, Hispanic race and Black race had much significantly higher elevated ratios of short sleep duration compared to their white peers. And this is just a schematic showing the adjusted odds ratio, where we see that nightmares was highest in past probable. We do see elevations in insomnia as well as night terrors. We did not have a past unspecified group, but you do see that there is this, even in this very narrow index, we see that there is a disturbance related to preschool children. Now, looking at infants, we did not have the effect as much with adjusting the index, and what we did see that there were significant associations with insomnia as high as 16-fold, which is quite high clinically. We did see elevations as well in night terrors in terms of 10.3. And if you see this schematically, you see that the past probable group, particularly in insomnia and night terrors, are very highly elevated with these disturbances. But interestingly, with this, now that we have a past unspecified group, you sort of see this gradation where they too are affected with elevations, particularly in the insomnia range. So to conclude, what we found from this Tier 1 data is that long COVID is strongly linked to sleep disruption in children, presenting in many different ways. But in the preschool and infants, what we did see this emergence of insomnia as well as nightmares. Using a modified log COVID index, specifically we found that nightmares was increased in preschool children, and infants we saw insomnia and night terrors. And I think the take-home message for my slides this afternoon is that I believe that sleep disturbances are a pervasive feature of long COVID in children. And then now that we know that this does exist in adults, this really does imply that sleep disturbance is an overarching symptom across the life course and perhaps represents a potential target in terms of looking at treatment. And so I wanted to thank all the participants and families that participated in RECOVER, as well as all the investigators and research staff, as well as our funding agencies. And of course, I'd also like to thank many others that participated in this, this abstract related to sleep. And unfortunately, I'm not able to attend the discussion because I got to actually go to fly out after this. But I did leave my email. I may be happy to take questions over email. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.